They all believed the human bride would be the first to fall, but destiny has a quiet way of humiliating those who mistake kindness for weakness. The royal arena of Blackwood Citadel had never known silence like this. Thousands of wolves filled the towering stone terraces beneath the silver glow of the full moon, yet not a single voice dared rise above a whisper. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the lone woman standing inside the ceremonial circle. Claire Whitmore's ivory wedding gown was stained with dust from the ancient marble beneath her feet, its embroidered hem torn after being dragged across the arena. Loose strands of chestnut hair danced in the cold mountain wind, while her fingers rested steadily around the worn leather grip of a simple silver sword that looked far too ordinary for a royal duel. Across from her stood Victor Kane, the feared Alpha King whose victories had become legends whispered from one territory to another. His confidence radiated through the arena without a single boast. Even the oldest wolves believed the contest had already been decided before the first step was taken. Somewhere beyond the rows of nobles and commanders, King Damon Blackwood watched from the royal platform without realizing that the woman he had sworn to protect had carried a different life long before she ever entered his kingdom. 3 days earlier, Claire had crossed the towering gates of Blackwood Citadel beneath gray autumn skies that smelled of pine, rain, and distant smoke from iron forges. She had not arrived as a celebrated queen. She had arrived as a political agreement carefully wrapped in silk and tradition. The marriage treaty between humans and wolves demanded peace after generations of uneasy borders, and Claire had become the promise neither side completely trusted. Servants avoided meeting her eyes. Noble ladies offered polite smiles that vanished the moment she walked away. Young warriors whispered that a human bride belonged in a quiet manor instead of a royal palace surrounded by the strongest wolves in the kingdom. Claire heard every word, yet answered none of them. She had spent most of her life discovering that silence often revealed more about other people than arguments ever could. King Damon Blackwood was no cruel tyrant, despite the frightening stories carried through distant villages. He ruled with discipline, demanded loyalty, and rarely wasted words. The moment he welcomed Claire into the castle, he offered respect without affection, courtesy without warmth. To him, this marriage protected the realm from another devastating war. Nothing more, nothing less. He believed the safest place for his fragile human bride was far from politics, far from rival kings, and far from any battlefield. He never imagined that the greatest misunderstanding inside his kingdom was not about the treaty, but about the quiet woman standing beside him. As Claire followed the palace attendants through endless halls lined with towering banners and ancient portraits of alpha rulers, she felt hundreds of curious eyes measuring every step she took. They saw delicate hands instead of steady ones. They saw gentle manners instead of quiet confidence. They saw a human woman surrounded by wolves and mistook compassion for helplessness. Claire lowered her eyes with practiced grace, allowing every false assumption to settle comfortably into the hearts of those watching her. After all, some truths were safest when nobody thought to search for them. The first evening inside Blackwood Citadel unfolded with breathtaking beauty that Claire had never imagined she would witness. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of tiny lights across polished stone walls, while musicians filled the grand hall with graceful melodies that echoed beneath towering arches carved by generations of master craftsmen. Noble families arrived wearing elegant cloaks embroidered with silver wolves, each greeting King Damon with deep respect before quietly turning their attention toward his new bride. Claire smiled politely whenever someone approached, offering warmth even when very little was returned. She understood that earning trust inside a kingdom built upon instinct would never happen in a single night. Still, she refused to let disappointment steal the dignity her father had spent years teaching her to carry. As the royal banquet continued, conversations drifted around the enormous dining hall like invisible currents. Some praised the treaty that had finally ended decades of uncertainty between wolves and humans. Others questioned whether peace built upon a human queen could survive the ambitions of neighboring alpha kings. Claire did not interrupt. She simply listened. Every word became another piece of a puzzle she had only begun to understand. Across the table, Damon occasionally glanced toward her without speaking. He noticed how carefully she observed the room, how she thanked every servant who poured her tea, and how she never reacted when another noble deliberately overlooked her presence. There was an unusual steadiness about her that refused to match the frightened young woman everyone expected to see. Even so, he convinced himself that quiet confidence was not the same as strength. Before the final course was served, Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, one of the oldest Luna nobles in the kingdom, approached Claire carrying a crystal goblet filled with dark berry wine. Her smile appeared gracious enough for the gathered guests, but the sharpness hidden beneath her eyes revealed something entirely different. While offering a formal welcome, she allowed the edge of her sleeve to brush the goblet just enough for the drink to spill across the front of Claire's ivory gown. A wave of soft laughter swept through nearby tables. Someone muttered that human queens always looked out of place among wolves. Another suggested that delicate flowers belonged in gardens instead of castles. Claire lowered her gaze toward the stain spreading across the embroidered fabric. For one brief heartbeat the hall waited for tears, embarrassment, or anger. None arrived. Instead, she calmly accepted a linen cloth from a startled servant and thanked him with genuine kindness before gently blotting the fabric herself. Her composure unsettled the very people hoping to humiliate her. Damon watched the entire exchange from his seat. Before he could rise, Claire quietly bent to retrieve something resting near the banquet table. It was the ceremonial silver knife that had been used moments earlier to slice the wedding cake after it had accidentally slipped from the edge of a serving tray during the commotion. She lifted it with effortless familiarity, turning the blade safely before placing its handle into the servant's waiting hand. The movement lasted only seconds, yet Damon noticed something that everyone else completely missed. Her grip had been precise, balanced, natural. It resembled someone who had repeated the same motion countless times rather than a sheltered young woman unfamiliar with weapons. Claire returned to her chair as though nothing unusual had happened, but Damon's thoughts refused to settle. That single graceful movement lingered in his mind long after the laughter faded. For the first time since the treaty had brought her into his life, he began to wonder whether there were chapters of Claire Whitmore's story that no one had bothered to read. Long after the banquet ended and the final musicians packed away their instruments, Blackwood Citadel settled into the deep stillness that came only after midnight. Moonlight poured through towering windows, painting silver patterns across polished stone corridors, while distant wolves kept silent watch from the castle walls. Claire found herself unable to sleep. The unfamiliar castle carried too many new sounds, too many whispered conversations hidden behind heavy wooden doors, and too many unanswered questions. Wrapping a simple cloak around her shoulders, she quietly wandered through the eastern gardens where cool mountain air carried the scent of cedar and fresh rain. The peaceful silence reminded her of home, where her father had always believed the quietest hours revealed the strongest truths. As she followed a narrow stone path beside a reflecting pool, the faint rhythm of steel striking steel drifted through the darkness. The sound was measured rather than frantic, controlled instead of reckless. Curiosity led her toward an abandoned training courtyard tucked behind towering hedges. There, beneath flickering lanterns, Damon practiced alone. Every movement reflected years of discipline. His sword glided through the night with remarkable precision, never wasting effort, never losing balance. Claire remained hidden behind a marble pillar, careful not to interrupt. She admired not the strength of his strikes but the restraint behind them. Power without control had frightened her since childhood. Controlled strength earned her respect. Damon eventually lowered his sword and turned without surprise. He had sensed another presence several moments earlier. His silver eyes settled on Claire with calm curiosity instead of suspicion. Rather than asking why she had been watching, he simply rested the practice blade against a wooden stand. "You cannot sleep either," he said quietly. Claire smiled with a hint of embarrassment. "Everything here still feels unfamiliar." Damon nodded. Castles have a way of reminding people they are guests before they become home. His words carried no cruelty, only quiet honesty. For several moments they stood together beneath the moon without speaking. Then Damon's attention shifted toward the wooden practice swords arranged beside the arena. "Have you ever held one?" he asked. Claire hesitated just long enough to choose her answer carefully. A long time ago, Damon handed her a lightweight training sword, expecting awkwardness from someone raised far from a warrior kingdom. Instead, Claire accepted it naturally, adjusting her grip almost without thinking before immediately correcting herself and lowering the blade. The tiny movement lasted only an instant, but Damon noticed it again. She had instinctively found the balance point before relaxing into an ordinary stance. Most beginners never did that. Claire realized her mistake and gently laughed. My father believed every child should know enough to protect themselves, even if they prayed never to need it. Damon studied her expression. There was no pride in her voice, no attempt to impress him, only quiet respect for an old lesson. And did he teach you well? He asked. Claire looked toward the moonlit mountains beyond the castle walls. He taught me that courage begins long before anyone notices it. It begins when nobody is watching. Damon found himself unexpectedly thoughtful. Throughout his life he had judged warriors by victories, strength, and reputation. Claire spoke of courage as though it belonged to ordinary moments invisible to everyone else. Before either of them could continue, hurried footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Captain Rowan approached with obvious urgency, stopping several feet away before bowing deeply. Your Majesty, scouts have returned from the western border. Victor Kane has crossed into neutral territory with an armed delegation. He requests an audience at sunrise. The peaceful night instantly felt colder. Damon thanked the captain before dismissing him, but the warning lingered between the king and his queen. Claire quietly returned the practice sword to its stand without another word. Neither of them realized that the next sunrise would begin changing everything they believed about one another. Sunrise transformed Blackwood Citadel into a fortress of ceremony rather than celebration. Rows of royal guards stood motionless beneath towering stone columns while silver banners carrying the Blackwood crest fluttered in the crisp mountain breeze. Every member of the royal court gathered inside the great hall long before the appointed hour. News of Victor Kane's arrival had traveled faster than the morning light, carrying with it an uneasy tension that even experienced warriors struggled to hide. Claire entered quietly beside Damon, dressed in a simple sapphire gown instead of the elaborate royal attire the court expected. She had deliberately chosen modest elegance over display, hoping to honor the kingdom without pretending to be someone she was not. Yet the moment she crossed the marble floor, countless eyes settled upon her once again. Some nobles exchanged doubtful glances. Others whispered that a human queen would only encourage Victor to question Blackwood's strength. Claire ignored every word, keeping her attention on the throne beside her husband. Damon noticed the whispers as well. Although he remained outwardly composed, a quiet frustration stirred beneath his calm expression. He understood politics well enough to recognize that fear often disguised itself as arrogance. Before he could address the court, the enormous oak doors swung open with measured precision. Victor Kane entered surrounded by his advisors, each wearing dark crimson cloaks embroidered with the crest of the Iron Ridge Kingdom. Victor walked with effortless confidence, offering a courteous bow that never reached his sharp gray eyes. His reputation had been built upon victories won through strategy as much as strength, making him every bit as dangerous in conversation as he was on any battlefield. The formal greetings passed without incident, but beneath every carefully chosen word lay years of rivalry waiting for an opportunity to surface. After exchanging diplomatic courtesies, Victor slowly allowed his gaze to settle upon Claire. A faint smile crossed his face, polite enough to satisfy etiquette yet unmistakably dismissive. Your Majesty, he said to Damon, I had expected the stories of your queen to be exaggerated. Instead, I find someone remarkably peaceful. It is an unusual choice for a kingdom surrounded by ambitious neighbors. The hall fell completely silent. The sentence sounded harmless to outsiders, but every noble present understood the insult carefully hidden beneath its polished surface. Damon answered before anyone else could speak. Strength appears in many forms. King Victor. Victor inclined his head with theatrical agreement. Perhaps, although history tends to remember the forms that can defend a crown. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably while others avoided looking toward Claire altogether. She could feel the weight of every expectation pressing against her shoulders, yet she refused to let embarrassment shape her expression. Instead, she met Victor's eyes with quiet composure. History also remembers the rulers who underestimated people simply because they looked different from themselves, she replied gently. Her voice never rose above ordinary conversation, yet every word carried through the enormous chamber with surprising clarity. A few advisors exchanged startled glances. They had expected nervous silence, not thoughtful confidence. Victor studied Claire for several long seconds before smiling again. This time his smile carried genuine curiosity. An interesting answer, he admitted. Perhaps there is more to our new queen than first impressions suggest. Damon glanced toward Claire, equally surprised. There had been no anger in her response, no attempt to embarrass their guest, only calm conviction. It was precisely the kind of restraint he valued in leadership. Even so, he could not ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside him. Victor rarely tested people without a larger purpose. Whatever game the rival king had begun inside the Great Hall, Damon suspected its true objective had not yet been revealed, and as the morning council continued beneath the watchful eyes of the court, an invisible storm quietly gathered around the throne. The council meeting stretched well into the afternoon, but no agreement came from the polished speeches exchanged across the long oak table. Maps of the western territories lay open before the gathered rulers, marked with rivers, mountain passes, and disputed villages that had changed hands too many times to count. Every proposal Damon offered focused on stability, trade, and protecting families who had grown tired of living beside uncertain borders. Victor listened with practiced patience, occasionally nodding before calmly dismantling each suggestion with carefully chosen questions that left the court divided. Claire remained silent beside Damon, studying not the maps but the people surrounding them. Her father had once told her that the loudest voice in a room was rarely the one making the greatest decision. She watched nervous advisors glance toward Victor before speaking, noticed commanders who avoided meeting Damon's eyes, and observed the subtle confidence of a rival king who seemed unusually certain that events were unfolding exactly as he intended. When the meeting paused for refreshments, Damon quietly stepped onto a balcony overlooking the castle gardens. The fresh mountain air offered a brief escape from the suffocating tension inside the council chamber. Claire joined him a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea prepared by the palace staff. Damon accepted one with a grateful nod before staring toward the distant pine forests covering the horizon. "I thought diplomacy would buy us more time," he admitted. Claire stood beside him, following his gaze toward the mountains, glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. "Sometimes people arrive with decisions already made," she answered softly. "Conversations only reveal them." Damon looked at her with quiet surprise. "You noticed that too?" Claire smiled gently. King Victor never asked how peace could succeed. He only asked why it would fail. Before Damon could respond, the heavy balcony doors opened once more. Captain Rowan approached with visible concern, carrying a sealed parchment bearing the crimson crest of Iron Ridge. "Your Majesty, King Victor has submitted a formal declaration according to the ancient covenant." Damon accepted the scroll, breaking the wax seal with steady hands. As his eyes moved across the page, the calm expression he had maintained throughout the day slowly disappeared. Claire watched the change without asking questions. She already sensed the answer before he spoke. "He has challenged Blackwood's right to govern the Western Territories," Damon said quietly. "According to the covenant, the dispute may be settled through a royal trial of honor instead of open war." Captain Rowan lowered his voice. "The council believes he planned this before crossing our border." His delegation arrived carrying witnesses, judges, and the ceremonial records required by ancient law. Claire felt a chill despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. She had grown up hearing stories about ancient trials where kingdoms defended their honor without sending thousands of innocent people into battle. The tradition had once saved countless lives, but it demanded extraordinary courage from those chosen to stand before the court. Damon rolled the parchment closed with measured control. "He expected me to refuse," If I decline, every neutral territory will believe Blackwood fears him. If I accept, I walk directly into the contest he prepared. Captain Rowan nodded grimly. The judges have already announced that the trial will begin tomorrow morning inside the royal arena. As the captain withdrew, silence settled between Damon and Claire once again. Far below, the castle gardens remained peaceful as children of palace workers laughed beside the fountains, unaware that the future of the kingdom now rested upon an ancient tradition older than any living ruler. Claire gently placed her untouched cup of tea upon the balcony railing. Deep within her memory, long-forgotten lessons stirred with unexpected clarity. Years spent training beneath her father's patient guidance had never been meant for glory. They had been meant for the day when protecting others mattered more than protecting herself, and for reasons she could not yet explain, she suddenly felt that day drawing closer with every passing hour. The announcement spread through Blackwood Citadel before sunset, moving faster than the ringing of the evening bells. Every corridor carried the same uneasy conversation. By ancient law, the royal trial of honor would take place at first light, witnessed by judges from every neighboring territory. The outcome would not simply settle a border dispute. It would shape how every kingdom judged the strength of Blackwood's crown for generations to come. Servants walked more quietly than usual. Veteran soldiers sharpened ceremonial armor that they prayed would never be needed beyond the arena. Even the castle seemed to breathe more slowly beneath the gathering weight of expectation. Damon spent the remaining hours inside the royal strategy chamber with his generals, reviewing every detail of the covenant. Claire entered only after the meeting had ended. Maps remained scattered across the enormous table, surrounded by empty cups of coffee and pages covered with hurried notes. Damon stood alone near the window overlooking the western cliffs. The fading sunlight painted long shadows across the room, making him appear older than he had only a day before. Without turning, he said softly, "I hoped your first week here would be filled with peace, not uncertainty." Claire walked beside him and rested her hands lightly against the stone windowsill. "Peace is not the absence of difficult moments," she replied. "Sometimes it is the reason people are willing to face them." Damon finally looked toward her. "If tomorrow becomes what Victor intends, I need you to remain inside the palace. The arena is no place for you." Claire held his gaze calmly. "Because I am human?" Damon hesitated before answering. "Because you are my queen, and I will not allow politics to place you in danger." His words carried genuine concern rather than dismissal, yet Claire recognized the belief still hidden beneath them. He respected her kindness, her patience, and her wisdom, but he continued to see her as someone who must always be protected. Before she could answer, an urgent knock echoed through the chamber. Captain Rowan entered carrying another sealed document, his expression more troubled than before. "Your Majesty, the judges have issued a clarification regarding tomorrow's trial." Damon accepted the parchment and unfolded it. His eyes narrowed as he read the additional clause. "Victor has invoked the complete covenant." Rowan nodded. Under the original articles, the ruling king may appoint a champion, but the challenger may reject that choice if the champion does not belong to the royal household. The final responsibility remains with the crown itself. Damon quietly folded the parchment. The room became completely silent. Claire understood the implication immediately. Victor had carefully arranged every condition to ensure Damon could not rely upon another warrior without risking the legitimacy of the trial. The rival king had never truly wanted negotiations. He wanted Damon standing alone before the entire alliance. Later that evening, as the palace settled beneath the quiet glow of lanterns, Claire returned to her private chambers and opened a cedar chest that had traveled with her from her childhood home. Beneath neatly folded dresses rested an old leather bundle wrapped with remarkable care. She slowly untied the worn straps, revealing a pair of well-maintained leather training gloves and a simple silver pendant engraved with her father's family crest. Memories returned with perfect clarity. Early mornings before sunrise, endless practice until every movement became instinct. Her father's gentle reminder that discipline existed to protect life rather than take it. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment before fastening the pendant around her neck. Outside her window, the moon climbed above Blackwood Citadel, illuminating the same royal arena where thousands would gather within hours. Somewhere beyond those ancient walls, Victor Kane undoubtedly believed he had already cornered the Blackwood throne. He had studied Daemon's reputation, measured the kingdom's armies, and calculated every political advantage. The one thing he had never considered was the quiet human queen who had spent her entire life allowing others to underestimate exactly who she was. Morning arrived beneath a sky of pale silver clouds, and the royal arena filled long before the ceremonial bells announced the beginning of the ancient trial. Delegations from neighboring kingdoms occupied rows of carved stone seats while royal judges dressed in white and gold robes assembled beneath the banner of the covenant. Every conversation carried the same expectation. They believed they were about to witness two powerful alpha kings determine the future of the Western territories. Claire walked beside Daemon through the eastern passage leading toward the arena floor, the soft echo of their footsteps almost disappearing beneath the distant murmur of thousands waiting beyond the gates. Daemon stopped before the final archway where sunlight spilled across the polished stone. He turned toward Claire with a calm expression that could not completely hide the concern in his eyes. "Remain with the royal council after I enter the arena," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, do not leave the platform." Claire looked at him for several moments before answering. "You still believe protecting me means keeping me far away from every difficult choice?" Daemon drew a slow breath. "I believe you deserve a life untouched by battles that are not yours." Claire smiled gently, not with disappointment but with understanding. "The moment I accepted this crown, your people became my people. Their future became mine as well." Daemon searched her face, realizing once again how impossible it was to shake her quiet certainty. Before he could reply, Captain Rowan hurried through the passage carrying another sealed notice from the judges. His expression revealed the message before he spoke. "Your Majesty, King Victor has submitted one final request permitted under the covenant." Daemon accepted the document and unfolded it. After reading only a few lines, his jaw tightened. He requests that before the trial begins, the royal household publicly affirm its confidence in the defending crown. Rowan nodded. He intends to embarrass Blackwood if anyone hesitates. Moments later, the enormous gates opened, revealing the arena bathed in brilliant morning light. Daemon stepped forward as thousands rose to their feet in respectful silence. Victor Kane already stood across the ceremonial circle, confident and composed, acknowledging the crowd with effortless charm. The chief judge welcomed both rulers before inviting them to present the formal declaration required by tradition. Victor spoke first, his voice carrying across every tier of the arena. He praised courage, honored the covenant, and finished by declaring complete confidence in his own kingdom. Polite applause followed. Then the judge turned toward Daemon. Before Daemon could answer, Victor smiled with perfect courtesy and addressed the royal platform instead. "I wonder," he said smoothly, "whether Blackwood's new queen shares the same confidence. After all, she comes from another world. Perhaps even she questions whether this throne can withstand what lies ahead." A ripple of uneasy whispers spread through the spectators. Hundreds of faces turned toward Claire. Several nobles lowered their eyes, fearing another carefully crafted humiliation. Daemon immediately stepped forward. "My queen owes no explanation to anyone." Victor raised both hands innocently. "Of course not. I merely thought the people might appreciate hearing the voice of the woman whose future depends upon today's outcome." Silence settled across the arena. Claire slowly rose from her seat, every movement calm and unhurried. She descended the royal steps until she stood beside Daemon beneath the morning sun. Instead of addressing Victor, she faced the gathered kingdoms. "Confidence is not proven by loud promises," she said with gentle clarity. "It is proven by standing beside those who carry responsibility when walking away would be easier." She then turned toward Daemon. "You once believed your duty was to shield me from every storm. Today, allow me to stand beside you instead of behind you." Daemon stared at her in complete silence. For the first time since their marriage, he no longer saw only the quiet human bride who had entered his castle under a peace treaty. He saw someone whose courage had never depended on strength that others could measure, and as the judges prepared to announce the next step of the ancient covenant, an unexpected feeling settled over the arena. The crowd had arrived expecting to witness a contest between kings, but they were beginning to realize that the heart of the story had never belonged to the kings alone. The chief judge slowly raised the ancient staff of judgment, and the whispers throughout the royal arena faded into complete silence. His voice carried across the stone walls with practiced authority. According to the first covenant, when the honor of a ruling crown is challenged, any member of the royal household may request permission to defend that honor, provided the reigning monarch grants consent before the trial begins. A wave of surprise swept through the audience. Even many of the oldest nobles exchanged uncertain glances. Few remembered that forgotten clause because no queen had invoked it in living memory. Claire stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The morning breeze lifted the edge of her sapphire cloak as she bowed respectfully toward the judges. I request permission to defend the honor of Blackwood. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then scattered laughter echoed from the upper terraces where visiting nobles shook their heads in disbelief. Victor Kane smiled with open amusement. Your Majesty, he said politely to Damon, surely this is unnecessary. I came prepared to settle a dispute between rulers, not to embarrass your queen before every kingdom represented here. Claire did not answer him. Her eyes remained fixed on Damon. The entire arena seemed to wait for the king's decision. Damon looked at the woman standing before him and remembered every quiet moment since her arrival. He remembered the steady way she accepted ridicule without bitterness, the effortless balance with which she had handled a practiced sword, the wisdom hidden inside simple conversations, and the certainty that never left her eyes even when everyone doubted her. For the first time, he realized the greatest mistake had not belonged to the court. It had belonged to him. He had mistaken gentleness for fragility. He stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. Claire, he said quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. If you are asking this because you believe you must protect me, you owe me nothing. Claire's expression softened into a calm smile. I am asking because we promised to carry this crown together. You have protected my dignity since the day I arrived. Allow me to protect the promise we made. Damon lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at the judges. Blackwood grants its queen full authority under the first covenant. Gasps spread through the arena. Even Captain Rowan looked stunned before slowly placing a respectful hand over his heart. The chief judge nodded solemnly. Permission is recognized. Claire removed her royal cloak and carefully folded it into Damon's hands. Beneath it she wore a simple traveling outfit designed for comfort rather than ceremony. There was nothing extravagant about her appearance, only quiet readiness. An attendant approached carrying the ceremonial weapons approved by covenant law. Claire selected a modest silver practice blade instead of the heavier sword decorated with jewels that many expected a queen to choose. She tested its balance with one smooth movement before lowering the tip respectfully toward the ground. Several retired commanders sitting among the judges leaned forward almost at the same time. That single motion revealed years of disciplined training hidden beneath graceful manners. Victor's confident smile faded ever so slightly. He had expected hesitation. He had expected uncertainty. Instead, he saw composure. The chief judge lifted his staff once again and announced that the trial would begin under the protection of the ancient covenant, where honor, restraint, and skill mattered above pride. As Claire walked toward the center of the ceremonial circle beneath the bright morning sky, the crowd no longer looked at her with pity. They looked at her with curiosity, and for the first time since she had crossed the gates of Blackwood Citadel, the kingdom began to wonder whether the quiet human queen had been carrying an extraordinary story all along. The royal arena became so quiet that even the morning wind seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Claire and Victor stood at opposite sides of the ceremonial circle, while the chief judge lowered the ancient staff that marked the beginning of the royal trial of honor. There was no roar from the crowd, only thousands of watchful eyes following every careful movement. Victor offered a courteous nod before stepping forward with measured confidence, convinced that experience alone would decide the outcome. Claire answered with the same respect, raising her silver blade into a balanced defensive stance that immediately caught the attention of the retired commanders seated beside the judges. They exchanged surprised glances. The posture was not accidental. It reflected years of disciplined instruction. Victor tested her with a series of controlled advances, expecting nervous reactions, but Claire never rushed. She moved with remarkable patience, allowing timing rather than force to guide every step. The arena slowly transformed from a place of spectacle into a lesson about restraint, discipline, and composure. Every movement Claire made reflected the principles her father had repeated throughout her childhood. A calm mind always sees the path that panic cannot. Damon watched from the edge of the royal platform, hardly recognizing the woman he believed he knew. The quiet bride who thanked servants, accepted insults with dignity, and spoke gently to strangers now displayed unwavering confidence beneath the gaze of every kingdom. She was not fighting to prove that she was stronger than anyone else. She was protecting peace, protecting Blackwood, and protecting the promise they had made together. As the contest continued, Victor's certainty slowly gave way to frustration. He had expected fear. Instead, he faced someone who refused to be controlled by it. At last, after a decisive exchange that remained completely within the rules of the Covenant, Claire executed a precise disarming technique taught in the oldest schools of swordsmanship. Victor's ceremonial sword slipped from his grasp and landed several feet away across the polished stone. Before he could recover it, Claire lowered the tip of her own blade toward the ground and calmly stepped back, signaling that the contest had reached its lawful conclusion. The chief judge immediately raised his staff. "The trial is decided," he declared. "Honor has been upheld. Blackwood retains its rightful claim under the First Covenant." The arena erupted into thunderous applause unlike anything the ancient walls had heard in generations. Noble families who had once questioned the human queen now rose to their feet in admiration. Even visitors from distant kingdoms respectfully bowed their heads. Victor looked at Claire for a long moment before offering a sincere nod. "I judged you by appearances," he admitted. "Today you reminded every ruler here why wisdom must always stand above pride." Claire returned the gesture with quiet grace. "Peace is the greatest victory any kingdom can earn." Damon slowly descended from the royal platform until he stood before his queen. For several silent moments he simply looked at her, understanding how completely he had underestimated the courage hidden behind her gentle smile. He draped the royal Blackwood cloak across her shoulders with both hands before speaking clearly enough for every soul inside the arena to hear. "I believed I was bringing a human bride into my kingdom. Instead, I was welcoming the bravest queen this crown has ever known." The crowd answered with another wave of applause as sunlight poured across the ancient arena, illuminating two rulers who now stood side by side as equals. From that day forward, storytellers no longer remembered Claire Whitmore as the quiet outsider who arrived because of a treaty. They remembered the queen who transformed doubt into respect, fear into hope, and a divided kingdom into one united by the simple truth that real strength is measured not by how loudly power is displayed, but by how faithfully it is used to protect others.